The tragic story of the Lonely Hearts Killers begins with two lost souls, Raymond Fernandez and Martha Beck. Damaged by life and desperate for love, they found each other through a Lonely Hearts ad in 1947. But instead of a happily ever after, their twisted relationship led them down a dark path of deception, betrayal, and murder. Posing as brother and sister, they lured lonely women with promises of love, only to rob and brutally kill them. By the time they were finally caught in 1949, they had left a trail of up to 20 victims across the country. This is the chilling tale of how loneliness and obsession can warp the human heart, transforming love into something monstrous. This is the story of the Lonely Hearts Killers. Raymond Fernandez, the charming con man. Raymond Martinez Fernandez and Martha Jewel Beck paths crossed in 1947, setting off a deadly chain of events. Raymond Martinez Fernandez was born in 1914 in Hawaii to Spanish parents. As a young man, he moved to Spain to work on his uncle's farm. There, he married a local woman named Encarnacion and started a family, having 4 children. But Fernandez was not content with domestic life. He abandoned his wife and children and set off in search of adventure. During World War II, Fernandez served in Spain's merchant marines and later worked with the British government as a spy, where he garnered a good reputation for carrying out his duties. When the war ended, Fernandez died to return to America to seek employment and send for his wife and children. On one fateful voyage to the Dutch West Indies, a steel hatch cover fell directly on his head, causing a severe indentation of his skull that damaged his frontal lobe and some suggest irreversibly altered his personality. After a lengthy hospitalization, he fell into a life of petty crime and was eventually sent to prison for theft. It was there that his cellmate, a Haitian man, introduced Fernandez to the practice of voodoo. Fernandez became convinced that these dark rituals gave him an irresistible power over women. Upon his release, Fernandez began answering Lonely Hearts ads placed by single women looking for love. Charming and handsome, he easily won their affection and trust. In October 1947, Fernandez began courting Jane Lucilla Thompson, a recently separated woman. Using her money, they took a cruise to Spain where Fernandez was still married to his first wife, Encarnacion Robles. He brazenly introduced Jane to Encarnacion, and the three dined out together in La Linea. On November 7, 1947, after an apparent fight between Raymond and Jane at their hotel, Jane was found dead the next morning of unknown causes. Her body was buried without an autopsy. Fernandez quickly fled back to the U.S., leaving High family behind once more. Using a forged will, Fernandez took over Jane's New York apartment, ruthlessly evicting her elderly mother in the process. Suspicions later arose that Jane was poisoned. But Fernandez was after more than love. He was a con man who seduced these lonely women and then robbed them of their savings before moving on to his next mark. In 1947, Fernandez met Martha Beck through a Lonely Hearts ad, and his life took an even darker turn. Martha Beck's troubled past. Martha Jewel Beck entered the world in 1920 in Milton, Florida. From a young age, life weighed heavily upon her. Glandular problems caused premature puberty and obesity, making her the target of cruel bullying and torment from classmates and her own mother. Even worse, Beck later claimed she suffered sexual abuse at the hands of her brother, while her mother turned a blind eye. Beck found solace in romance novels and nursing school, eventually becoming a licensed nurse. But her weight and troubled past made it difficult to find steady work or love. Whilst working at an army hospital in California, she would frequent the local bars at night picking up soldiers. One of those one-night stands led to her falling pregnant with her first child in 1944. On hearing the news, the soldier made a failed attempt to kill himself by jumping in the California Bay. Beck never saw him again. After the short stint in California, Beck moved back to Florida, where she met local bus driver Alfred Beck. The two casually dated. When she fell pregnant with a boy, they decided to marry. However, this union of duty was short-lived, and he divorced her after 6 months. As a single mother of 2, she took a job at a hospital for children in Pensacola and escaped further into her fantasy world of romance films and literature. Desperately lonely, Beck placed a Lonely Hearts ad in 1947. When Raymond Fernandez responded, Beck thought she had finally found her Prince Charming. They sent letters back and forth over 2 weeks, and Fernandez presented himself as a successful businessman from Spain who had settled in New York for new opportunities. Knowing that Beck was a nurse, he complimented her full heart and great capacity for comfort and love. Beck eagerly anticipated their romantic union, especially so after Fernandez requested a lock of her hair. Little did she know that Fernandez wanted it to perform his usual voodoo rituals. Fernandez visited Beck in Florida, and she quickly fell under his spell. Meanwhile, he was using the opportunity to scope out her assets and determine if she was worth the effort to defraud. He met her children and spent the evening intimately with Beck before he decided to return to New York. Beck insisted that they stay in Florida and get married, but Fernandez made clear that he had no intention to stop his business in New York. To soothe her protests, he assured her he would come back soon or send money for her to join him. Beck naively saw this as a proposal of sorts and quickly informed people in her neighborhood that they would be marrying. In New York, Fernandez attempted to back away from his promise, and a distraught Beck attempted suicide in a fit of anguish. He then agreed to let her visit him in New York, where they spent 2 weeks together. On returning to Florida, Beck was fired without explanation at the hospital, which she had been excelling at as a supervisor. Seeing this as a sign, she dressed her kids, packed some bags, and got on a bus to New York City. She arrived at Fernandez's doorstep with her children. Whilst Fernandez did not object to having Beck around, having the children was a hindrance he did not desire. He convinced Beck to get rid of them. Obediently, Beck abandoned both her children at a Salvation Army on January 25, 1948. Noting Beck's undying loyalty and willingness to cater to his whims, Fernandez confessed his crimes to her, and rather than being repulsed, Beck was intoxicated by the adventure and danger. She agreed to help him seduce and rob lonely women. Posing as Fernandez's sister to allay any suspicions, Beck watched as he romanced other women, her jealousy building to a frenzy. If Fernandez paid too much attention to his intended victim, Beck's rage exploded. She ruthlessly eliminated any woman who posed a threat to her relationship with Fernandez. Together, they would eventually graduate from theft to murder. The murder spree victims of the Lonely Hearts. Together, they made plans for their next victim. As they pored over photographs of widows and Lonely Hearts ads, they settled upon Miss Esther Henn in southern Pennsylvania. The odd-looking pair traveled to Pennsylvania, where they met with Miss Henn in February 1948. And within the month, they were married in Fairfax, Virginia. He was polite to her for a few days, but then became abusive when she wouldn't sign over her insurance policies and pension to him. Henn left the relationship, robbed of her car and hundreds of dollars by Fernandez. Their next target was Myrtle Young of Arkansas. Fernandez married Young on August 14, 1948 in Illinois, with Beck posing as his sister. Beck did everything she could to prevent the marriage from being consummated, even sleeping in the same bed as Young. When Young protested, Fernandez drugged her into unconsciousness. He then sent Young back to Arkansas on a bus, robbed of $4,000. Young died in a hospital the next day. In late 1948, Fernandez began courting Janet Fay, a 66-year-old widow from Albany, New York. Under his moniker, Charles Martin, Fernandez played on Fay's devout Catholicism by heavily referencing God and religion in their correspondence. They finally met in downtown Albany and spent time getting acquainted. Beck was introduced as Fernandez's sister, and within a few days Fay excitedly agreed to marry Fernandez. In early January 1949, she withdrew over $6,000 from her bank accounts to start their new life together. On January 4th, Faye left Albany with Fernandez and Beck to a rented apartment on Long Island. Varying accounts cloud the full events, but when Beck was left alone with Faye for this first time, in a fit of jealous rage, Beck bludgeoned Faye with a hammer and strangled her to death with a scarf. They stuffed Faye's body in a trunk and had Fernandez's sister unwittingly store it at her apartment for several days before Fernandez returned to retrieve and bury the trunk in the cellar of a rented house. To cover their tracks, they sent several letters to Faye's family members by typewriter, depicting how happy she was with her new husband. The problem was, Faye did not own a typewriter and did not know how to type. The family immediately notified the police. The deadly couple then targeted Delphine Downing, a young widow with a 2-year-old daughter in Grand Rapids, Michigan. In late January 1949, Fernandez began consummating his relationship with Downing, much to Beck's anger. When Downing discovered Fernandez without his toupee, she threatened to go to the police, feeling she had been deceived about his baldness and scar. Beck gave her some sleeping pills to try to calm her down. Downing's daughter began to persistently cry with her mother asleep, and in a frustrated rage Beck choked Downing's crying daughter Raynell, leaving visible bruises on her neck. Fernandez then shot and killed Downing with her deceased husband's pistol, so she couldn't report them to the police. After staying in the house for 2 days planning their escape, cashing checks and stealing valuables, Fernandez told Beck to get rid of Raynell, who wouldn't stop crying. Beck drowned the little girl in a metal tub of dirty water in the basement before Fernandez buried the body in a small hole next to her mother. Rather than leave immediately, the couple stayed in town to watch a movie. By the time they arrived back to the apartment to pack their bags, they received a visit from 2 police officers, who promptly arrested them, having been alerted by suspicious neighbors on February 28, 1949. The trial. The trial of Raymond Fernandez and Martha Beck was a media sensation. Tabloids dubbed them the Lonely Hearts Killers, and the public was fascinated by Beck's obesity and Fernandez's Latin charm. The proceedings took place in the summer of 1949 at the Bronx Criminal Court. Due to the brutality of the Downing murders and Michigan's lack of death penalty, the state of New York extradited the couple to stand trial for the murder of Janet Faye, the only killing that took place in New York. The evidence against them was overwhelming. Police had found Faye's personal effects, including a distinctive ring, in the couple's possession. Fernandez had also cashed checks from Faye's account. Initially, Fernandez claimed that Beck was his sister and had nothing to do with the murders. He confessed to killing Faye, but said it was in self-defense after she attacked him for sleeping with other women. However, under interrogation, he admitted this was a lie to protect Beck. Fernandez then claimed he was completely under Beck's control and that she was the mastermind behind the murders. Beck, on the other hand, portrayed herself as an unwitting pawn, blindly in love with Fernandez and unaware of his criminal activities. She said she thought the women were only being robbed, not murdered. Beck's defense also focused heavily on her weight, trying to garner sympathy from the jury. Her lawyer described her as a fat, unlovely, and tragic woman who was slavishly devoted to Fernandez. Throughout the trial, the couple's strange relationship was on full display. They constantly bickered and accused each other of lying, yet also exchanged tender glances and words of affection. Fernandez called Beck "my girl," and she gazed at him adoringly from the defense table. Their story of twisted love and murder enthralled the nation. In the end, the jury didn't buy either of their defenses. After deliberating for only 37 minutes, they returned a guilty verdict. Both Raymond Fernandez and Martha Beck were sentenced to death. Beck became hysterical upon hearing the sentence, screaming, "I'm innocent, my story is true." As she was dragged from the courtroom by matrons, Fernandez merely clicked his tongue and said, "Oh well, I guess that's that." Execution and aftermath. On March 8, 1951, Raymond Fernandez and Martha Beck were executed side by side in the electric chair at Sing Sing prison. Fernandez was put to death first. After 3 jolts of electricity, he was pronounced dead at 11 p.m. Moments later, it was Martha Beck's turn. She was the 6th and last woman to be executed at Sing Sing. Prison officials said she was composed at the end, whispering prayers until the current hit. In the years since their deaths, the story of the Lonely Hearts Killers has continued to fascinate the public. Their crimes have inspired numerous books, films, and television shows. In 1970, the low-budget film The Honeymoon Killers offered a gritty take on their story. The 26 movie Lonely Hearts featured Salma Hayek as Beck and Jared Leto as Fernandez. But perhaps the most telling legacy of Raymond Fernandez and Martha Beck is the light their case shone on the post-war loneliness epidemic. In a time before online dating, personal ads were a common way for people to seek companionship. The Lonely Hearts Killers exploited this vulnerability in the cruelest way possible. Their victims were women on the margins of society, widows, single mothers, spinsters who were searching for love and connection. In Fernandez, they thought they had found a chance at happiness, only to have their lives brutally cut short. The tragic irony is that it was loneliness that drove both the victims and the killers into each other's paths. In the end, the story of the Lonely Hearts Killers is a cautionary tale about the perils of isolation and the desperate lengths people will go to find companionship. It's a reminder that even the most basic human need, the need for love and belonging, can be twisted into something dark and deadly. In our next case, we jump 60 years ahead to a marital spat turned murderess. Our tragic story begins when Melanie McGuire, a dedicated nurse and mother of 2 young boys, finds her picture-perfect life in vain. Melanie seemed to have it all: a career helping couples have children, a husband who was a Navy veteran, and a beautiful family. But behind closed doors, her marriage to Bill McGuire was crumbling. Melanie made a fateful decision to begin an affair, setting off a chain of events that would lead to a shocking and heartbreaking crime. In April 2004, Bill McGuire was brutally murdered, shot and dismembered. His remains callously discarded in suitcases in Chesapeake Bay. All signs pointed to Melanie as the killer. Prosecutors painted her as a cold-blooded murderer who chose a new life with her lover over her husband and children. But Melanie maintains her innocence to this day. This is the story of the notorious suitcase killer, a murder case that continues to captivate and divide people. Picture perfect life to marital turmoil. Melanie Lynn Slate seemed to live a charmed life growing up in Ridgewood, New Jersey in the 1970s and 80s. A bright student, she graduated from Rutgers University with a double major in math and psychology. Melanie then followed her passion into nursing, graduating second in her class from nursing school in 1997. 2 years later, Melanie married Bill McGuire, a Navy veteran 6 years her senior. The couple settled into an apartment in Woodbridge Township, New Jersey, and started a family, welcoming 2 sons. From the outside, they appeared to be living the American dream. 2 professionals, Bill a computer programmer and Melanie, a nurse at a prominent fertility clinic, raising their boys together. But the McGuires' marriage was far from perfect. There were tensions and arguments bubbling under the surface. Melanie would later claim Bill had a gambling problem and could be volatile and violent with her at times. Still, in April 2004, the couple took a big step together, closing on a $500,000 dream home in a quiet New Jersey suburb. It seemed like a fresh start for their growing family. Just 48 hours after signing the papers on their new house, Melanie did something no one expected. On April 30th, she filed for a restraining order against Bill, alleging he had slapped her and shoved a dryer sheet in her mouth during a heated argument. Melanie said Bill stormed out after the fight, and she locked herself in the bathroom with their sons. It was the last time she saw her husband alive. Disappearance and gruesome discovery. Bill's sudden disappearance set off alarm bells with his friends and family. The 39-year-old was glued to his phone and BlackBerry for work. So when he suddenly went silent, people knew something was wrong. Melanie told people they had fought and Bill left in a rage, but she acted unconcerned. She never even filed a missing persons report. As the days ticked by with no word from him, his loved ones feared the worst. Those fears were realized on May 5th, when a suitcase containing human legs washed ashore near Virginia Beach, a 4-hour drive from the McGuire's New Jersey home. Over the next week, 2 more matching suitcases were discovered. The second suitcase, found on May 11th, contained Bill's head and torso with 3 bullet wounds, 2 to the chest and 1 to the head. 5 days later, on May 16th, the third and smallest suitcase was recovered, floating in the water near the Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel's second island. This one held Bill's severed arms, the collection of evidence. Hoping to identify the victim, police released a facial reconstruction sketch based on the remains. It was this sketch that would break the case wide open. An acquaintance of Bill's recognized him and came forward. Suddenly, the victim had a name: William Bill McGuire, and police had a prime suspect, his 31-year-old wife, Melanie. But there was a jurisdictional hitch. The suitcases had been found in Virginia, but authorities quickly determined the murder itself had not taken place there. The Virginia police subsequently handed the entire investigation over to the New Jersey State Police, since the McGuires lived in Woodbridge Township. The body in the suitcases was soon identified as William Bill McGuire. He had been shot to death and then methodically dismembered. Melanie immediately fell under suspicion, given the timing of Bill's disappearance and her blasé attitude about him being missing. As investigators dug into the couple's life, a possible motive emerged. Melanie had been having a long-term affair with a married doctor at her fertility clinic named Bradley Miller. Prosecutors theorized Melanie wanted to get rid of Bill so she could be with her lover and start a new life. As New Jersey investigators began digging into the couple's life, more and more incriminating evidence against Melanie surfaced. They discovered that just 2 days before Bill vanished, on April 26, 2004, Melanie had purchased a .38 caliber handgun in Pennsylvania. Bill had been shot to death with that exact type of gun, using distinctive wad-cutter bullets. Even more damning, Melanie's receipt showed an additional $9.95 purchase. The store only sold 2 items for that price: targets and a box of wad-cutter bullets. The evidence against Melanie began to pile up. Why did she buy a .38 caliber handgun just 2 days before Bill vanished? Why were there internet searches on their home computer for things like undetectable poisons and how to commit murder? And what about the mysterious black garbage bags and blood evidence found in the McGuire's apartment that matched the bags and Bill's DNA? Then, a tip came in from an employee at a private towing company. He claimed that he had towed Bill's blue 2002 Nissan Maxima from the parking lot of the Flamingo Motel in Atlantic City, nearly 100 miles from the McGuire's apartment. The car was moved on May 8th, over a week after Bill disappeared. Investigators discovered Melanie had done something very odd in the days after Bill disappeared. She drove to Atlantic City, found his parked car, and moved it to a remote motel parking lot. Grainy surveillance footage captured her in the act. Melanie later claimed this was a bizarre prank, but prosecutors saw it as her covering her tracks. She also couldn't explain why she had taken 2 trips to Delaware, not far from where Bill's remains were recovered. Trial and conviction. As the case against Melanie grew, so did the sensational media coverage. The press dubbed her the suitcase killer and turned the trial into a national spectacle. Prosecutors argued Melanie was a cold-blooded murderer who shot her husband, cut up his body in the bathroom, drained his blood in the bathtub, and calculatingly got rid of his remains to be with her lover. They painted her as an unfaithful wife and heartless mother who valued her freedom over her family. But Melanie and her defense team fought back against this portrayal. They claimed Bill was a gambler in deep debt to the mob and that his murder was a hit. Melanie took the stand in her own defense, admitting to the affair but insisting she didn't kill her husband. Her lawyers argued the forensic evidence was circumstantial, and that prosecutors couldn't definitively prove how, when, or where Bill was killed. After a 23-day trial that captivated the country, the jury reached a verdict in just 13 hours. They found Melanie guilty of first-degree murder, possession of a weapon for an unlawful purpose, desecration of human remains, and perjury. Melanie, then 34 years old, was stoic as the verdict was read. The judge sentenced her to life in prison, plus 5 years. She wouldn't be eligible for parole for more than 60 years. Melanie was sent to the maximum security Edna Mahan Correctional Facility in Clinton, New Jersey. Her sons, just 4 and 2 years old when she was arrested, lost both parents in one shocking act of violence. In the years since her conviction, Melanie has never wavered from maintaining her innocence. From behind bars, she has filed numerous appeals arguing her high-powered defense attorney, Joe Tacopina, provided ineffective counsel. She claims he failed to call key witnesses and pursue evidence that could have exonerated her. But the courts have rejected her appeals, and she remains in prison. False claims of innocence. In a rare interview with ABC News in September 2020, Melanie spoke out from behind bars, still maintaining her innocence 16 years after her conviction. "I'm doing this because there's a murderer walking around," she told ABC News' Amy Robach for 2020. "The killer is out there, and it's not me." Melanie expressed the pain and frustration she still feels over being found guilty of such a heinous crime. "After all these years, I still feel hurt. I still feel bothered. Like, how could somebody think that I did that?" she said, her voice filled with emotion. The interview touched on another heartbreaking aspect of Melanie's story: the fact that she has not seen her 2 sons since the day she was convicted. When Melanie was sent to prison for life, custody of the boys was given to Bill's sister, Cindy Ligosh. Speaking directly to her now adult children, Melanie shared a message: "Make up your mind. Don't accept what you're just being told on the surface. Dig." It was a plea for them to look deeper into the case, and a mother's desperate hope that her sons might one day question her conviction. The interview was a rare glimpse into Melanie's life behind bars and her unwavering insistence that she did not kill her husband. Despite the mountain of evidence against her and the years that have passed, Melanie remains steadfast in her claims. For her, the fight for justice and the chance to reunite with her children continues, even from the confines of a prison cell. Melanie's case is the subject of multiple true crime TV shows, podcasts, and a Lifetime movie. Suitcase Killer: The Melanie McGuire Story, released in June 2022. The film, starring Candace King as Melanie, reignited interest in the nearly 20-year-old case and raised new questions about Melanie's guilt or innocence in the minds of some viewers. The movie depicts Bill as an unfaithful, gambling-addicted husband and Melanie as a wife and mother pushed to the brink. But Bill's family slammed the film as inaccurate and disgusting for slandering Bill's memory. They maintain Melanie is exactly where she belongs for brutally murdering Bill. The film's creative team says they wanted to show both sides and let the audience reach their own conclusions. Melanie's supporters believe an innocent woman has been wrongfully imprisoned, that shoddy police work and a media-hungry prosecutor rushed to judgment without definitive proof. They argue the circumstantial evidence leaves room for reasonable doubt. But for Bill's loved ones and the prosecutors who tried the case, there is no doubt Melanie is a murderer who killed her husband in cold blood and almost got away with it. The Melanie McGuire case remains one of New Jersey's most notorious crimes, a shocking story of love, lust, betrayal, and a brutal murder. It captured the nation's attention like few crimes do. The image of Bill McGuire's body being discarded in suitcases in the sea is seared in the public consciousness. But for the 2 young boys at the center of this tragedy, it is the devastating story of their family being ripped apart. They lost their father to a violent death and their mother to prison. The horror of what happened to Bill McGuire and the knowledge of their mother's conviction is a heavy burden they will carry for life. nearly 2 decades later, the case still generates fierce debate. Did Melanie McGuire get away with murder, or is she serving a life sentence for a crime she didn't commit? Is she a calculating, cold-blooded killer, or a mother wrongfully ripped from her children? The truth lies somewhere in the suitcases of evidence, the witness testimony, and Melanie's own words. For now, she remains the suitcase killer, one of New Jersey's most infamous inmates. Only time will tell if that moniker is just, or if the real killer is still out there. We now turn to the mysterious case of the McDonald's boys. Singapore, 1986. Best friends Kay Chin An and To Hong Huat, both 12 years old, began an ordinary walk to school together one sunny morning. Laughing lightheartedly, they planned to make a quick stop at the shops across the street before class. But the quick detour led them to an unthinkable tragedy that shook the nation for decades. By the end of this very day, the two innocent boys who left side by side, closest of companions, vanished without a trace, launching years of agonizing mystery. What happened to the McDonald's boys? Their puzzling disappearance ignited feverish public speculation, tormented their bereft families, and remained one of Singapore's most notorious unsolved crimes: the disappearance. Our tragic story begins on the afternoon of May 14, 1986. 12-year-old best friends Kay Chin An and To Hong Huat were last seen walking together towards Owen Primary School in Singapore after Chin An had stopped by Hong Huat's house to pick him up along the way. The two young boys, both wearing neat school uniforms, chatted happily with the innocence of youth as they headed to class. As they crossed the street nearing the school, adventurous Chin An told Hong Huat he wanted to quickly duck into the shops across the way first. Hong Huat nodded in agreement and continued the last stretch towards school, expecting his friend would catch up in no time. Upon arriving at school, Hong Huat set his bag down and waited eagerly for Chin An's return. Meanwhile, Chin An came back from his little detour and ran into his classmate Wang Piwei, who kindly offered to watch Chin An's school bag so he could keep his hands free for the shops. Chin An thanked Piwei and left his bag in his friend's safekeeping, telling Piwei he'd be back shortly to pick it up. But Chin An would never return to retrieve that book bag. And as afternoon classes started at 12:55 p.m., a worrying realization began dawning on the teachers that neither Chin An nor Hong Huat showed up. Marked absent from class, the last sighting of them had been at 12:30 p.m., before they effectively vanished without explanation or trace. Panic began setting in after school, as frantic calls were made summoning both boys' parents to urgent meetings with the principal. Wang Piwei relayed his last interaction with Chin An to the distressed families, hoping it might yield clues. The baffled parents pleaded desperately for any signs of their young son's whereabouts. But a quick neighborhood search that evening through the local estates would uncover nothing. In the days that followed, police intensely scoured all areas surrounding the school, putting up missing posters throughout Singapore begging citizens for help. But even as 100 people would eventually be interviewed over this mystifying case, not a single credible lead emerged. Nearly 3 months later, in August 1986, authorities received an anonymous tip that filled parents with momentary hope. Informants claimed Hong Huat and Chin An were positively identified on Pulau Ubin, a small island off the coast of Singapore. Officers painstakingly combed every last inch of that island's dense tropical landscape. But the exhaustive search only compounded the community's agony, finding no trace of the boys there. United in hope, despite their own limited financial means, the grieving families of To Hong Huat and Kay Chin An first banded together to offer a small but meaningful reward of 1,000 Singapore dollars to anyone who could provide information about their missing sons. As months dragged on without answers, their desperation grew. In July 1986, just 2 months after the boys vanished, the families doubled the reward to $5,000, begging the public for help solving the baffling mystery. When this still failed to uncover substantial leads, The heartbroken parents pooled their meager resources again, just 2 months later in September, quadrupling the reward to $20,000 despite their poverty. They felt utterly helpless and were willing to sacrifice everything if it meant finding their lost children. In October 1986, hope arrived from an unexpected source. Moved by the plight of the families, McDonald's Singapore managing director Robert Kwan made a game-changing offer on behalf of the fast food giant. McDonald's would put up an incredible $100,000 reward for credible information to help resolve the case. McDonald's didn't stop there. They plastered the smiling faces of To Hong Huat and Kay Chin An on missing persons posters across hundreds of their restaurant outlets all over Singapore. For months, customers were greeted with the haunting stares of these lost boys begging to be found. The incredible reward money and publicity blitz led to renewed public intrigue and investigative leads. Tips poured in throughout late 1986 and 1987 as McDonald's used its immense influence to keep attention on solving this confounding mystery. Though the boys' fate remained unknown, the families finally felt like they had allies on their side. Search expands and leads run cold. By 1987, despite exhausting all efforts within Singapore's borders, the closest thing authorities had to leads were a few alleged sightings in neighboring countries. Expanding their search efforts internationally, police reached out to their regional counterparts in Malaysia, Indonesia, and Thailand for assistance tracking down these latest scant breadcrumbs. But even enlisting the help of elite organization Interpol and casting the net widely in these nearby nations, the promising cross-border collaboration sadly yielded nothing substantive that could reunite this mystery with its long-grieving parents. Then, in a moment of inspiration in November 1988, investigators turned to an emerging technological technique that would morph facial features to predict what young Chin An could look like 2 years on from the last known photo of him at just 12. Forensic artists generated an uncannily realistic image of their best projection, widely publicizing the new photo in hopes it may trigger recognition from witnesses who now knew better the proper age of one of these missing youths today. But despite the waves from this innovative attempt, Chin An's whereabouts remained an agonizing dead end. Hong Huat's determined mother Tan Gio Kwan refused to surrender hope. In 1990, she proactively appealed to influential Malaysian officials to leverage their regional resources investigating her son's baffling fate. While Malaysian authorities pledged their cooperation analyzing leads across the border, once again, no meaningful progress ensued. In yet another creative attempt to spark public recollection in 1994, police used technology to render impressions envisioning how both Kay Chin An and To Hong Huat could appear now fully grown 20-year-old men, unrecognizable from childhood memory. Authorities circulated these speculative aged renderings widely, praying for the miracle of finally just one legitimate witness coming forward who may have seen these young men. But the now 8-year cold case seemed permanently frozen in elliptic mystery. Stunning accusation. Then in 1996, 12 painful years since the boys disappeared, a private investigator and ex-policeman named Henry Tay ignited explosive new public speculation by positing his own theory. Tay had thoroughly investigated Hong Huat's family history and suspected his long-estranged biological father To, who Don may have been involved with the baffling vanishing. It turned out Hong Huat was the product of an affair To had years prior. And while To deeply loved this illegitimate son, Hong Huat's birth mother gave him up for adoption to To's then-girlfriend Tan Gio Kwan, the only mother Hong Huat would ever know. When To and Tan eventually married then divorced, she forbid him any contact with his son, the boy To missed terribly. Tay hypothesized that To crossed paths with the children that fateful day in 1986. And with bitterness and mental instability from his broken life overwhelming him, To erupted, forcibly abducting his most prized person, the son denied him. One can only imagine young Chin An tragically getting caught up in the deranged chaos. This bombshell accusation led to immediate public outcry and police apprehending To, as the prime suspect. However, after intense interrogation over a 24-hour period, To had to be released right back onto the streets. With still no shred of tangible evidence against him beyond speculation, tying him to the boy's grim vanishing. The last hope. Another dead end filled with fleeting euphoria gave way to sinking resignation that this terrible riddle may remain permanently unsolved. Until 14 restless years later in 2010, when authorities received an electrifying anonymous tip that whispered the first plausible account of the boy's final known moments. This latest informant confidently claimed to have witnessed frail young Hong Huat being forcefully snatched away against his cries and protests for help. He described seeing loyal Chin An desperately pleading with this threatening figure looming over them, demanding Hong Huat go with him. The terrified mystery witness then disturbingly recounted seeing this petrifying man boldly declaring to Chin An that he was Hong Huat's long-lost father. The caller ominously disclosed whispers, the boys may both still be alive somewhere remote. Perhaps hidden prisoners abroad at the mercy of this volatile figure who feels entitled to his son. Could this finally be the break in the baffling 26-year-old ice-cold trail that leads to closure on what really happened that horrific spring day in 1986? Authorities urgently investigated the compelling account. But regretfully, yet again investigators struggled corroborating the gripping claims into substantiated breakthrough evidence. Lives left shattered. In the painful years that followed the inexplicable disappearance of To Hong Huat and Kei Chin An, both families understandably clung to the slim hope that their young sons might still be alive, somehow surviving against the odds. Hong Huat's mother Tan Gio Kwan returned to Malaysia to await word, repeatedly reaching out to officials for updates on her son's case. In 1990, she pleaded with Datuk Seri Michael Chong, head of the Malaysian Chinese Association's Public Services and Complaints Department, to help investigate Hong Huat's fate. Despite his efforts, the trail had gone cold, and after several calls, Tan sadly did not follow up again. Her ultimate fate is unknown. Meanwhile, Chin An's family relocated from their Toa Payoh home, but returned regularly, hoping their boy found his way back. The disappearance devastated the family, especially Kei Chang Pan, Chin An's father. Constant concern for his missing son took a serious toll both physically and mentally. In later years, Mr. K suffered failing health, including stroke and dementia, before passing away a few years prior to 2020. According to Chin An's mother Tay Mi Na in a 2020 interview, she retreated from society for over 20 years, watching neighborhood children play while privately grieving. The tragedy created lasting rifts between the formerly close-knit families, according to residents. Though Tay began cautiously re-engaging her community in recent years, the pain of losing her son so young still weighed heavy after over 30 years. Both families bore unimaginable torment from the mysterious incident, clinging to fading hopes their boys would defy odds and return safely home one day. Though with each passing year, any trail that could solve this tragic mystery grew colder. Over 30 agonizing years later, since these beautiful boys vanished, seemingly no closer to resolution, our story fades to the final credits. With the hopes, prayers, and tears of two families suspended eternally frozen in this painful mystery locked in time, the haunting legend of the McDonald's boys' tragic disappearance remains forever imprinted as one of Singapore's most confounding unresolved crimes. Two bright, young lives, with so much promise ahead, inexplicably extinguished without explanation on that fateful day. In our next case, we look at the Black Widow. This chilling story begins with a woman whose outward charm masked inner darkness. Stacey Castor, a seemingly devoted wife and mother, would become known as the Black Widow, leaving a trail of death and deception in her wake. Over the span of a few short years, both of Castor's husbands would die under mysterious circumstances, followed by the near-fatal poisoning of her own daughter in a desperate attempt to conceal her crimes. A woman who sacrificed the lives of those closest to her, all to satisfy her own greed and hunger for control. A master manipulator, Castor almost got away with murder, if not for the tireless efforts of detectives who saw through her web of lies. This is the story of the Black Widow, a woman whose cold-blooded crimes shocked a community and captured the morbid fascination of a nation. Early life of Stacey Castor. Stacey Castor was born Stacey Ruth Daniels on July 24, 1967, in the small town of Weedsport, New York. From the outside, her early life appeared relatively normal and stable. As a young woman, Stacey worked as an office manager, and in 1988, she married her first husband, Michael Wallace. The couple went on to have 2 daughters together, Ashley, born in 1988, and Bree, born a few years later in 1991. But behind closed doors, the Wallace marriage was far from idyllic. Stacey and Michael worked opposite shifts to make ends meet, with her on the day shift as an ambulance dispatcher and him working nights as a mechanic. Friends would later recall that Michael struggled with substance abuse, which put a strain on the relationship. The couple had even discussed the possibility of getting a divorce, but that never came to pass. On the afternoon of January 11, 2000, a shocking discovery occurred. 38-year-old Michael Wallace was found unresponsive on the living room sofa by his father-in-law. He was rushed to the hospital, but soon pronounced dead. An autopsy determined he had died of a heart attack, and no foul play was suspected at the time. Stacey was now a widow at age 32 with 2 young daughters to support. Marriage to David Castor. Just 8 months after losing her first husband, Stacey married 41-year-old David Castor, a man she had been introduced to through her boss in 2021. David was the owner of an air conditioning company where Stacey worked. From the outside, they appeared to be a happy, prosperous couple living a comfortable life in the suburbs of Syracuse, New York. But the marriage quickly became troubled. Heated arguments and alleged infidelity became a feature of their tumultuous relationship, and again, talks of divorce begun to spring up. One can also speculate that domestic issues had become abusive. David confided in family members that he slept with his bedroom door locked because he feared his wife. The investigation and shocking discovery. On August 22, 2005, came a disturbing replay of events. In a frantic 911 call, Stacey told the operator she was worried her husband David had locked himself in their bedroom and committed suicide. Responding officers had to break down the locked door. Inside, they found 48-year-old David Castor lying naked and unresponsive on the bed. He was pronounced dead at the scene. At the home, detectives made a series of odd discoveries. A short glass tumbler filled with a bright green liquid rested on David's nightstand, alongside a bottle of antifreeze. A turkey baster was also found in the kitchen garbage. David's body was sent for an autopsy and toxicology testing. Meanwhile, investigators began delving into Stacey's background and examining the eerie similarities between the deaths of her 2 husbands. As suspicions mounted, detectives made the decision to exhume the body of Stacey's first husband, Michael Wallace, for testing, producing a shocking revelation. New toxicology tests revealed his body contained lethal levels of ethylene glycol, a key ingredient in automotive antifreeze. Chronic exposure to ethylene glycol can mimic symptoms of a heart attack. Investigators now had evidence that both of Stacey Castor's husbands had suspiciously died from the same form of poisoning, the ultimate betrayal. With law enforcement closing in and fearing she would soon be discovered, Stacey Castor took the unthinkable step of trying to eliminate the one person she feared could implicate her in the murders: her own 19-year-old daughter, Ashley. In a sickening twist, Stacey staged an apparent murder-suicide, poisoning Ashley with a lethal cocktail of alcohol and crushed pills mixed in a drink. She then typed out a 750-word suicide note on the family computer, claiming to be written by Ashley. In the note, Ashley purportedly confessed to killing both her father and stepfather, and was now taking her own life, unable to bear the crushing guilt any longer. On the morning of September 14, 2007, Ashley was found comatose in her bed by her younger sister Bree. She had a black eye, bruises on her arms, and was frothing at the mouth. Rushed to the hospital in critical condition, doctors said Ashley was only minutes from death. Doctors pumped her stomach and put her in a medically induced coma to reduce the swelling in her brain. Miraculously, Ashley survived the attempt on her life. When she regained consciousness, she was adamant she had not tried to kill herself and had no memory of writing a suicide note. Computer forensic analysis soon confirmed the suicide note had been written by Stacy Castor, not Ashley. The timestamp showed it was typed on the family computer during a 10-minute window when cell phone records proved Ashley was passed out in her bed. Investigators also found evidence of Stacy researching fatal doses of alcohol and drugs in the days before Ashley's poisoning. The pieces of the sinister puzzle were falling into place. The trial. In 2007, Stacy Castor was arrested and charged with second-degree murder for the death of her second husband David Castor, and attempted murder for the poisoning of her daughter Ashley Wallace. Facing serious charges, she turned to defense attorney Chuck Keller for help. Keller planned to argue that Ashley was actually the one responsible for David's death, and that she had also tried to take her own life. However, prosecutor William Fitzpatrick was confident in the evidence against Castor. The case had many strong forensic elements that pointed to her guilt: computer data, DNA, and expert analysis of the faked suicide note. Fitzpatrick was determined to make sure all of this evidence was presented clearly to secure a conviction against Castor. Prosecutors argued she was motivated by greed, hoping to cash in on David's life insurance money. They believed she also killed her first husband, Michael Wallace, for the same reason back in 2000, although she was never officially charged with his death. The Black Widow Trial. In January 2009, the so-called Black Widow went on trial for murder in a case that captured national attention. The prosecution's case was damning. They had Stacy's fingerprints on the antifreeze bottle and glass in David's room. They had computer forensic evidence proving she forged the phony suicide note. But most powerful of all, they had the emotional testimony of Ashley Wallace herself, telling the jury how her own mother had tried to kill her and frame her for murder. Throughout the trial, Stacy Castor maintained her innocence, adamantly suggesting that Ashley was the real killer. But her desperate attempts to shift blame on her daughter fell flat. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for only 4 hours before returning a unanimous verdict of guilt on all counts. Stacy Castor, the Black Widow, was sentenced to the maximum penalty of 51 years to life in prison. She would not be eligible for parole until age 87. In a final statement to the court, Castor acknowledged the evidence against her was substantial, but stopped short of admitting guilt, saying only, "I must bear responsibility." She said she accepted her punishment in the hopes it would allow her family to heal. But for Ashley Wallace, the wounds inflicted by her mother's ultimate betrayal would last a lifetime. As she addressed the court at Castor's sentencing, Ashley said through tears, "She took away the only person in the world that I had. She was my best friend, and she tried to kill me. I wish she would say sorry for everything she did." Even after being found guilty and sentenced to 51 years in prison, Stacy Castor refused to admit she had done anything wrong. From her prison cell at Bedford Hills Correctional Facility, she continued to claim she was innocent of killing her husbands and trying to murder her daughter Ashley. In a TV interview after the trial, Castor said she was shocked by the verdict and blamed Ashley for what happened. She showed some sympathy for her younger daughter Bree, calling her an innocent victim, but expressed no remorse for her crimes. Castor's own mother and stepfather stood by her. However, both Ashley and Bree were relieved by the guilty verdict. They cut off contact with their mother, deeply hurt that she never apologized. Psychiatrist Dr. James Knoll explained that Castor fits the profile of a Black Widow-type killer who murders husbands for financial gain, rather than a typical serial killer. He noted that if guilty, Castor's lack of remorse and willingness to sacrifice her own child to protect herself showed psychopathic traits. Noel said killers like Castor will deny to the bitter end, unable to ever admit the truth, even to themselves. Stacy Castor died of a heart attack in her prison cell on June 11, 2016 at the age of 48. She took any secrets about her husband's murders with her to the grave. In the end, this woman who tore apart her own family in the most vicious way possible died alone in a prison cell, forever branded as the Black Widow. The Black Widow's story is about more than just the evil that one woman was capable of. It's also about the dogged pursuit of justice to bring a killer to account, and the strength of a daughter who survived the ultimate maternal betrayal. Ashley Wallace endured unspeakable trauma, but refused to let it define her. She found the courage to stand up to her mother and help ensure she would never harm anyone else. Today, Ashley Wallace has rebuilt her life. She is married and focused on moving forward, but the scars of her past remain. As she said after her mother's conviction, "I know that I didn't do anything wrong. As hard as it is to get up every day and put a smile on my face, I know that I have to. Because if I don't, then Stacy won. The Black Widow may be gone, but for her daughter, the struggle to heal from her poison continues." Ashley Wallace is the true survivor of this tragic tale. This was Agent Magpie, and remember guys, be good. And if you can't be good, be careful.